The humid German air, thick with the smell of pine and distant rain, pressed down on Elvis Presley. It was August 1958, and he was Private Presley, now serving his country far from the familiar embrace of Graceland. The uniform felt heavy, a constant reminder of the life he'd left behind, a life of screaming fans and dazzling lights. Here in Friedberg, the days were structured by military discipline, drills, inspections, the steady rhythm of army life. He missed his home, his music, his easy laughter. Most of all, he missed his mother, Gladys. Every letter from her was a lifeline, a tangible piece of home that he clutched like a precious jewel. She always worried, always fussed, always reminded him to eat his vegetables. He smiled, thinking of her warm, comforting presence. Gladys was the anchor of his world, the one person whose love was so pure, so unconditional. It felt like sunshine. He'd promised her he'd be careful, promised he'd come back. He'd just finished a long, grueling training exercise, his muscles aching, his brow damp with sweat beneath his fatigue hat. The mess hall was buzzing with the low hum of conversation, the clatter of trays, and the distant blare of a radio. Elvis picked at his meal, a bland concoction of meat and potatoes, his mind miles away, drifting back to Memphis. Pictured Gladys in the kitchen at Graceland, humming one of his gospel songs, perhaps baking a pie. The thought brought a pang of homesickness, so sharp it almost stole his breath. Suddenly, a corporal appeared beside his table, his face uncharacteristically grim. "Presley, you're wanted in the company office." "Urgent call?" Elvis frowned, a flicker of unease stirring in his gut. Urgent calls were rare, usually. The mail was how they communicated. Had something happened back home? His heart began to pound a little harder against his ribs. He pushed his plate away, his appetite suddenly gone. "Who is it, Corporal?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Your father, Private, Vernon Presley. He sounds troubled." "Trouble?" The word echoed in Elvis's mind, sending a chill down his spine despite the warm air. Vernon rarely called unless it was important. His father was a quiet man, not one for dramatics. This was different. This felt heavy. He rose, pushing past the other soldiers, who watched him with a mix of curiosity and concern. Even in the army, Elvis Presley was still Elvis Presley, the famous singer, and anything involving him drew attention. He tried to ignore their stares, focusing only on the growing dread in his stomach. The company office was a small, Spartan room, smelling faintly of old paper and stale coffee. Sergeant Barnes, usually a gruff, no-nonsense man, looked up from his desk, his expression softening slightly as Elvis entered. He gestured towards the black telephone on the corner of the desk. "It's for you, son. Take your time." Elvis nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Picked up the receiver, the plastic cold against his ear. He could hear the faint static of the transatlantic connection, a thin, fragile line stretching across an ocean, connecting him to a world that felt suddenly very far away. "Hello," he said, his voice a little hoarser than he intended. "Elvis, son, is that you?" Vernon's voice, usually steady and low, was raspy, strained, and filled with a fragile tremor. It was the sound of a man trying to hold himself together, barely. "Pa." "Yeah, it's me. What's wrong? What's happened?" Elvis's heart hammered against his ribs. He gripped the receiver tighter, his knuckles turning white. He could hear the shallow, rapid breathing on the other end, the muffled sound of a suppressed sob. A wave of nausea washed over him. He braced himself, leaning against the cold metal of the desk, trying to prepare for whatever Vernon was about to say. His mind raced, cycling through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had something happened to Graceland? Had there been a fire? An accident? His eyes closed, a silent prayer forming on his lips. Please God, let it not be Mama. There was a long, agonizing pause on the line, broken only by Vernon's ragged breathing. Elvis felt the silence stretch heavy and suffocating. He could almost hear his father trying to find the words, trying to gather the strength to deliver whatever devastating news he held. "Pa, please," Elvis urged, his voice barely a whisper now. "Tell me." The next sound was a choked sob, raw and guttural, unlike anything Elvis had ever heard from his father before. And then Vernon's voice, broken and barely audible, whispered, It's your mama, son. She's gone." Elvis asked, his voice strangely calm, disconnected. He felt a cold dread spread through his veins, numbing him. Another sob, closer this time, and then Vernon managed to articulate the unimaginable. "She passed, son, early this morning. Her heart, it just gave out." The world tilted. The air in the small office seemed to thicken, pressing in on Elvis until he could barely breathe. Black receiver felt impossibly heavy in his hand, as if it contained the entire weight of his universe now crumbling into dust. "No," he whispered, a denial that was more a gasp of pain. "No, Pa, that's not it. Can't be." He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make the words disappear, to rewind the last few minutes, to return to the simple dread before the confirmation, but the truth was there, stark and brutal. His mother, Gladys Presley, the center of his universe, was gone. The phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering against the desk. The distant static on the line was replaced by a deafening roar in his ears. He stood there, frozen, staring at the wall, as if trying to conjure her image, her smile, her loving eyes. But there was only a vast, terrifying emptiness. The humid German air suddenly felt freezing cold, and then the world stopped spinning. The clatter of the phone as it hit the desk echoed in the stunned silence of the company office. Sergeant Barnes looked up, his brows furrowed with concern, sensing the profound shift in the young man before him. Elvis stood rigid, his face pale, his eyes wide and vacant, staring straight ahead as if witnessing a ghost. His entire posture radiated a shock so deep it seemed to have frozen him in place. "Presley," Sergeant Barnes ventured softly, his voice cutting through the ringing in Elvis's ears. "What is it, son? What did he say?" But Elvis didn't respond. He simply shook his head. A slow, almost imperceptible movement, as if trying to dislodge an impossible thought. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The air in his lungs felt too heavy, too thick to be expelled. Then a low moan escaped him, a sound of pure agony that seemed to tear from the very depths of his soul. His hands, which had been clenched at his sides, now flew up, covering his face. His shoulders began to tremble, then shake violently. "No," he choked out, the word muffled by his hands. "No, not Mama. Please, no." The denial was raw, primal. He squeezed his eyes shut, tighter, as if by doing so he could rewind time, make the devastating words unsaid, erase the terrible truth. But the truth was relentless. It pressed in on him. Sergeant Barnes was out of his chair in an instant, moving quickly to Elvis's side. He put a tentative hand on his shoulder. "Elvis, talk to me. What happened?" Elvis flinched at the touch, as if the pain inside him was too great to bear any physical contact. He stumbled back, bumping into the filing cabinet, then slowly slid down to the floor, his legs giving way beneath him. He landed with a soft thud, curling into a fetal position, his head bowed, his hands still pressed tightly against his face. The sobs came, then not quiet tears, but wrenching, gut-deep wails that seemed to tear him apart. It was the sound of a child who had lost his most cherished possession, a man whose anchor had been ripped away. Each sob was punctuated by a gasp for air, each gasp filled with unimaginable pain. "Lamar," he cried, his voice broken, indistinguishable from the sounds of a wounded animal. "Oh, Mama, don't go, please don't go." Sergeant Barnes stood over him, helpless. He'd seen men break down before in battle under duress, but this was different. This was the pure, unadulterated grief of a son who had lost the one person who had loved him unconditionally, the one person who had always been there. Word of the urgent call had already spread through the barracks. Lamar, Fike, Elvis's close friend and fellow soldier, burst into the office, his eyes wide with alarm. He took in the scene. Elvis crumpled on the floor, shaking uncontrollably, Sergeant Barnes looking on with a mixture of pity and concern. "Elvis!" Lamar rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside his friend. He gently tried to pull Elvis's hands away from his face. "What happened? What's wrong?" Elvis finally lowered his hands, revealing a face streaked with tears, eyes red and swollen, a mask of utter despair. "Lamar, she's gone," he choked out. His voice hoarse. Mama's gone." She passed. Lamar stared, his own face blanching. Gladys Presley was a legend to Elvis's inner circle, a warm, matriarchal figure who doted on everyone. The news hit him like a physical blow. He wrapped his arms around Elvis, pulling him close, letting his friend bury his face in his shoulder. "Oh, Elvis, no," Lamar murmured, his own voice thick with unshed tears. He held Elvis tight, rocking him gently, knowing there were no words that could possibly ease this kind of pain. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, appeared in the doorway, then his usually impassive face etched with concern. He had been alerted to the urgent call. He took in the scene, his shrewd eyes assessing the depth of Elvis's grief. He knew how much Gladys meant to Elvis more than anyone. She was his entire world before the music took hold, even after she remained his rock. "My boy," the colonel said, his voice unusually soft, his Dutch accent pronounced. "I am so very sorry." Elvis didn't seem to hear him. He was lost in his own private torment, a storm of grief consuming him. His body convulsed with sobs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The vibrant, larger-than-life personality that was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was gone, replaced by a shattered young man. Memories, sharp and painful, began to flood his mind. Her gentle touch, her soft humming, the way she'd beam with pride at his first performance, her endless belief in him, even when no one else did. She protected him, cherished him, nurtured him. She was the one person he truly depended on, the one person who truly understood him. And now she was gone. The thought was unbearable. How could he live without her? How could the sun possibly rise tomorrow? The very idea of a world without Gladys in it felt like a cruel, impossible joke. Lamar continued to hold him, offering the only comfort he could, a silent, steady presence. Sergeant Barnes quietly called for a medic, recognizing the severity of Elvis's collapse. Colonel Parker, ever pragmatic, even in the face of such tragedy, began to formulate a plan. Flights, arrangements, none of that mattered. Nothing mattered but the gaping void in his heart, a chasm that felt infinite and cold. He was adrift, unmoored, in a world that had suddenly gone dark. King had lost his queen, his guiding light, and in that moment he felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. The small, sterile room in the barracks infirmary felt like a cage. Elvis lay on the cot, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, unseeing. The medic had given him something to calm him, but the sedative only dulled the edges of his raw grief. It didn't erase it. His body felt heavy, numb, yet his mind raced, replaying the words, the terrible, impossible words. "She's gone." Her heart gave out. His throat was raw from crying, his eyes swollen shut, but still the tears welled up silent now, tracing hot paths down his temples and into his hair. The pain was a physical ache, a crushing weight on his chest that made every breath a struggle. He remembered the last letter he'd received from her just a few days ago. Her familiar, slightly shaky handwriting, filled with news from home, worries about his health, and endless expressions of love. My precious baby, she'd always begun her letters. He clutched at the memory, trying to cling to it, but it felt fragile, slipping through his fingers like sand. Suddenly, a vivid image flashed in his mind. Gladys, standing by the kitchen stove at Graceland, laughing. Her laughter, warm and melodious, echoed in his ears, then faded into a haunting silence. He could almost smell the biscuit she'd be baking, hear the quiet hum of her gospel records playing in the living room. Graceland, his beautiful home, now felt like an empty shell devoid of its heart. He thought of her hands, always gentle, always there to comfort him, to smooth his brow when he had a fever, to clap excitedly at his first attempts at guitar. Her eyes filled with an unwavering pride that was both a shield and a spur. Gladys had been his biggest fan long before the world knew his name. She had lived for him, cherished him, protected him fiercely from anyone who might try to hurt her boy. And he wasn't there. The guilt was a burning coal in his stomach, twisting with the grief. He was thousands of miles away, serving in an army, while his mother, his beloved mama, had taken her last breath without him. He should have been there. He should have held her hand. He should have told her one more time how much he loved her. The should-haves were a torment, a relentless whisper in his mind. Lamar Fike sat quietly in a chair beside the cot, watching him with a mournful expression. Red West, another army buddy and part of Elvis's Memphis Mafia, stood leaning against the wall, his face solemn. They didn't speak, knowing words were useless. Their presence, though, was a small comfort, a quiet acknowledgement of his unbearable pain. They just were there. After a long silence, Elvis finally spoke. She was so proud of me, Lamar, so proud." His voice cracked. "She wanted me to do well in the army, said I was doing my duty." Lamar nodded, his own eyes glistening. "She loved you, Elvis, more than anything in the world." "I know," Elvis whispered, a fresh wave of tears blurring his vision, "and I loved her more than life itself. She was my everything, my twin soul." He remembered her dreams for him, not just for his music, but for him as a person. She wanted him to be happy, to be good, to live a full life. But how could he do that now? Thought of facing the world without her felt impossible. The joy, the spark, the very essence of who he was, felt like it had been rooked away with her. His mind drifted back to the last time he'd seen her at Fort Hood before he shipped out. Her tearful goodbyes, her arms wrapped tightly around him, refusing to let go. He'd tried to be strong for her, but even then he'd felt a premonition of this profound loss. He'd kissed her goodbye, hugged her one last time, promising to call, to write, to come home soon. Soon wasn't soon enough. The door creaked open and Sergeant Barnes peered in. "Colonel Parker is here, Elvis. He wants to talk about arrangements." Elvis didn't move. "I don't care about arrangements," he mumbled, his voice thick with apathy. "I just want my mama back." Colonel Parker entered, his face grave, but with a hint of his usual determination. "I know, son, I know, but we have to get you home. Your father needs you, and your mama, she needs to be laid to rest." The word rest hung in the air, heavy with finality. Elvis flinched. He imagined her still and silent, and a fresh wave of despair washed over him. "You'll be granted emergency leave," Colonel Parker continued, his voice softer than usual. "We've made arrangements for a flight out of Frankfurt tomorrow morning, as soon as possible." "Tomorrow?" The word felt like a death knell. He wanted to go home now. He wanted to scream in rage against the injustice of it all, but he was too exhausted, too broken, to even argue. Closed his eyes again, letting the sedative pull him deeper into a hazy numbness. But even in the haze, her laughter echoed, her voice whispered his name, and the vast aching emptiness in his heart remained. He was lost, adrift in a sea of grief, and he had no idea how he would ever find his way back to shore. The world outside the infirmary room was a blur of hurried preparations. Colonel Parker, with his characteristic efficiency, had pulled every string imaginable. Within hours, Elvis was being helped into his dress uniform, the fabric stiff and unyielding, a stark contrast to the fluid movements of his grief-racked body. His hands trembled as he buttoned the shirt, each small action requiring immense effort. Lamar and Red were with him, silent companions in his sorrow. They helped him pack a small bag, mostly just essentials. His guitar, usually his constant companion, lay untouched in its case. The thought of music, of singing, felt like a betrayal. How could he make music when the very source of his joy had been extinguished? The drive to Frankfurt Airport was a silent, somber affair. The German countryside, usually picturesque with its rolling hills and quaint villages, passed by unnoticed through the tinted windows of the military sedan. Elvis stared out, his eyes seeing nothing, his mind trapped in a loop of painful memories and an overwhelming sense of unreality. It felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He thought of the last time he'd been on a plane flying to Germany, full of anticipation and a nervous excitement about his duty. Now he was flying home, but it wasn't home anymore. Not truly, not without her. It was just a house, a place where his heart used to reside. At the airport, the usual bustling chaos of travelers seemed muted, distant. Colonel Parker shielded Elvis from the curious glances and whispered conversations, his presence a solid if somber barrier. A military escort guided them quickly through the formalities. Elvis moved like a zombie, his movements stiff and slow, his face a mask of grief that even his celebrity couldn't hide. On the tarmac, a large military transport plane waited, its engines humming a low, mournful tune. The gangway looked impossibly steep, a path leading to an unknown future that felt terrifyingly empty. Inside the plane, it was largely empty, specially arranged for his journey. He took a window seat, staring out at the gray tarmac, the flickering lights of the airport. Lamar and Red sat across from him, offering quiet support. Colonel Parker sat a few rows back on the phone, handling the never-ending stream of logistics. The engines roared to life, a vibrating tremor passing through the cabin. The plane began to taxi slowly at first, then picking up speed. Elvis watched the ground rush by the lights of Frankfurt blurring into streaks. As the plane lifted off, soaring into the dark sky, he felt a crushing weight descend upon him. He was leaving her, leaving the place where he'd received the news, leaving a piece of his heart behind. He closed his eyes, tears squeezing from beneath his eyelids. The tears weren't just for her loss, but for the loss of his innocence, the shattering of the protective bubble she had always maintained around him. He felt utterly exposed, vulnerable in a way he never had. Before, hours melted into a timeless blur. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The flight attendants, aware of the circumstances, left him alone, occasionally offering a gentle word or a glass of water. Kind stewardess, her eyes filled with sympathy, approached him at one point. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Presley," she murmured, her voice soft. "Your mother was a wonderful woman." Elvis looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. He didn't know how she knew, but he appreciated the simple kindness. He just nodded, unable to speak. The gesture, however small, was a flicker of human connection. In the vast, cold space of his grief, it reminded him that the world, though shattered for him, was still turning. And there were people who cared. He spent most of the flight staring out the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds below, then the dark ocean, then the first faint glow of dawn over the horizon. The sun, however, brought no warmth to his soul. It felt like a cruel mockery rising when his own sun had set. He thought of Gladys. Her love, her strength, her quiet sacrifices. She had always put him first. Always. And now she was gone. The finality of it was a knife twisting in his heart. As the plane began its descent, the familiar landscape of America came into view. Green fields, small towns, then the sprawling suburbs of Memphis. His heart began to pound. With a new kind of dread, he was almost home. Almost. The wheels touched down with a jolt, a jarring reminder that this nightmare was real. Plane taxied towards the terminal, slowly, deliberately. Every yard it covered felt like a step closer to an abyss. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to brace himself for what was to come. He knew the moment he stepped off that plane, the world would rush in, and there would be no more escaping the truth. He was home, but his home would never be the same. The air in Memphis was heavy, a suffocating blanket of heat and humidity that pressed in on Elvis the moment he stepped off the plane. It was August 14th, and the city was baking, but Elvis felt a chilling cold deep in his bones. Flashbulbs popped from a respectful distance, as a few photographers, alerted by the news, captured his grim arrival. He kept his head down, shielded by Colonel Parker and the military escort, moving quickly to the waiting car. The drive to Graceland was a blur of familiar streets that now seemed alien, tinged with a profound sadness. Every tree, every house, every billboard was a reminder of a life that felt irrevocably broken. The silence in the car was thick, punctuated only by Elvis's ragged breaths and the hum of the engine. As they turned onto Elvis Presley Boulevard, the iconic gates of Graceland came into view. The wrought iron gates, usually a symbol of joy and success, now loomed like the entrance to a mausoleum. The familiar grounds, so vibrant and full of life just weeks ago, seemed to hold their breath, hushed and somber. The car pulled up the long driveway, stopping at the front steps. Elvis hesitated, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Stepping inside felt like crossing a threshold into a new, unbearable reality. Pushed open the heavy front door, the familiar scent of his mother's favorite potpourri, of fresh linens of home washing over him. It was a cruel comfort, a phantom presence that twisted a knife in his already wounded heart. The grand entryway, usually echoing with laughter and music, was eerily quiet. A few family members and close friends were gathered in the living room, their faces etched with grief. They rose as he entered, their eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and sorrow. Then he saw him. Vernon. His father sat slumped on the sofa, his usually strong shoulders bowed, his face pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The sight of Vernon so utterly broken hit Elvis with a fresh wave of agony. His father, his other rock, was shattered. "Pa," Elvis whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Vernon looked up, his eyes meeting Elvis's. In that gaze there was an ocean of shared grief, a profound understanding that transcended words. Vernon pushed himself up, his movements stiff, and then they were in each other's arms. It was a clumsy embrace, two heartbroken men clinging to each other for support, their bodies shaking with the force of their shared pain. Elvis buried his face in his father's shoulder. The familiar scent of him mingled with the scent of sorrow. Vernon held him tight, patting his back, a low, guttural sob escaping him. "My boy," Vernon choked out, his voice raw. She's gone, son. She's really gone." "I know, Pa," Elvis whispered back, tears streaming down his face, soaking Vernon's shirt. "I know." They held each other for a long time, finding a fragile solace in their shared suffering. Their family, their small circle of loved ones, watched them with tearful eyes, respecting the sacredness of the moment. They were two halves of a broken whole, now left to navigate a world without their beloved Gladys. After a while, Vernon pulled back his hand, still resting on Elvis's arm. She's at the funeral home, son. We need to go see her." The words hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement. Elvis flinched, the thought of seeing her, still and lifeless, unbearable. He wanted to remember her alive, vibrant, laughing. But he knew he had to go. He had to say goodbye. The ride to Forest Hill Cemetery was short but agonizing. Funeral home was quiet, a hushed reverence filling the air. Vernon led him into a private viewing room, and there she was. Gladys lay in a pale blue casket adorned with white flowers. Her face was serene, peaceful, but it wasn't her. The vibrant spark, the warmth, the very essence of Gladys was gone. Her hands, usually so expressive, lay clasped still. Elvis approached slowly, his feet heavy, each step a testament to the immense weight of his grief. He stood beside the casket, staring down at his mother, his vision blurred by tears. He reached out a trembling hand, gently touching her cold, still cheek. It was so unlike her, so unlike the warmth. He remembered Lamar, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He choked back a sob, a fresh wave of pain washing over him. He sank to his knees beside the casket, burying his face in his hands. He wanted to beg her to wake up, to tell him this was all a terrible dream. He wanted to feel her arms around him, her comforting presence. But there was only silence and the cold reality of death. Vernon knelt beside him, his arm going around Elvis's trembling shoulders. Together, father and son, they wept, two men utterly devastated by the loss of the woman who had been the heart of their family, the light of their lives. Graceland, their home had always been full of Gladys's love. Now it was just an empty embrace, and they were left to navigate its silent rooms, haunted by the echoes of her laughter and the overwhelming presence of her absence. The morning of August 16th dawned gray and humid, mirroring the mood that hung heavy over Memphis. The funeral for Gladys Love Presley was set for later that day, and the city, and indeed the world, mourned with Elvis. News reporters had descended on Graceland, camera crews lined the streets, and thousands of fans, some traveling from across the country, gathered outside the gates, their faces solemn. They laid flowers, cards, and small tributes. A silent chorus of shared sorrow for the woman who had nurtured the king. Inside Graceland, the atmosphere was thick with a quiet, pervasive grief. Family and close friends moved through the house, offering condolences in hushed tones. Elvis, dressed in a dark suit, felt numb, his body moving on autopilot. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, his face pale and drawn. He barely spoke, answering questions with simple nods or shakes of his head. Vernon, though equally devastated, tried to be strong for his son, his arm often resting on Elvis's shoulder, a silent testament to their shared pain. The bond between them had deepened in these crushing hours, forged in the crucible of their unimaginable loss. As the time for the service approached, Elvis found himself walking out to the funeral procession cars. The crowd outside Graceland, parting respectfully, their murmurs of sympathy, a low, continuous hum. He caught glimpses of their faces, sad, empathetic, understanding. It was a strange comfort, knowing that so many people shared his sorrow even if they couldn't comprehend its depth. The procession moved slowly through the streets of Memphis. A mournful parade. The route to Forest Hill Cemetery was lined with thousands more silent onlookers, their hands over their hearts, their faces reflecting the city's profound sense of loss. It was an unprecedented display of public mourning for a private citizen, but testament to the immense love and respect the public held for Gladys, simply because she was Elvis's mother. At the cemetery, the air was thick with the scent of flowers and the quiet sobs of the gathered mourners. The small graveled area around the open plot was filled with family, friends, and the quiet presence of his army buddies, Lamar and Red, standing stoically in their uniforms. Elvis stood beside his father, his hand gripping Vernon's arm. The Reverend C.L. Robinson, a family friend, began to speak, his voice gentle and compassionate. He spoke of Gladys's kindness, her unwavering faith, her devotion to her family, and especially her profound love for her son. She was a good woman, the Reverend said, his voice a balm. A loving wife, a dedicated mother. Her greatest joy was her boy Elvis. She nurtured him, she believed in him when others doubted, and she was so immensely proud of the man he became. Elvis listened, the words washing over him, each one a fresh wave of pain and bittersweet memory. He remembered her boundless pride, her shining eyes, every time he sang, every time he achieved another milestone. He felt the fierce protective love for her swelling in his chest, so strong it hurt. When it was time for the final farewell, Elvis stepped forward, his legs heavy, his heart a raw wound. He looked down into the open grave, at the simple, beautiful casket, holding his mother. The finality of it was crushing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white handkerchief, her handkerchief that he'd carried with him since he left for the army, clutched it tight, then slowly, carefully, placed it on the casket. A silent promise that he would carry her love with him. "Oh, Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I love you so much." The soft sound of dirt falling onto the casket, a stark, brutal sound, marked the end of an era. Gladys' love. Presley was laid to rest as the small gathering began to disperse, leaving Elvis and Vernon for a few final private moments. A strange sensation washed over Elvis. Despite the crushing weight of his personal loss, he felt a faint flicker of warmth. It was the outpouring of love, not just for him, but for her. The thousands of people who had come, the quiet respect, the shared tears. It was a testament to the beautiful person Gladys was, and the profound impact she had on those around her, directly or indirectly. He looked around at the faces of his family, his friends, his loyal army companions. Their love, their quiet strength, was a lifeline. He was not alone in his grief. They too felt her absence, but more importantly, they remembered her presence, her love, her spirit. In that moment of deepest sorrow, surrounded by a chorus of unspoken love, Elvis felt a faint, almost imperceptible shift. The grief was still immense, suffocating, but a tiny spark of something else had ignited within him. A sense of gratitude, a recognition that while her physical presence was gone, her love, her memory, and her legacy lived on, not just in him, but in everyone she had touched. It was a harrowing farewell, but also, surprisingly, a shared embrace of enduring love. The days following the funeral blurred into a haze of quiet grief and restless nights. Graceland, usually a bustling hub of activity, was now enveloped in a profound silence, punctuated only by hushed whispers and the occasional distant murmur of the city. Elvis moved through the rooms like a ghost, haunted by the echoes of his mother's laughter, her humming, the scent of her perfume that seemed to linger in the air. Every object, every piece of furniture held a memory of her. His appetite was gone. Sleep, an elusive visitor. He spent hours in his mother's bedroom, sitting on the edge of her perfectly made bed, running his hand over her silk scarves, breathing in the faint scent that still clung to them. He would stare out the window, lost in thought, his mind replaying moments from his childhood, moments of pure, uncomplicated love. Vernon, equally heartbroken, was his constant companion. They would sit together often in silence, sometimes sharing a memory, a quiet tear. Their shared loss had forged an even deeper bond between them. A silent understanding that only they could truly comprehend. One afternoon, a week after the funeral, Elvis found himself in the kitchen, a place Gladys had loved. He opened the pantry door, half expecting to see her reaching for a baking tin. Instead, his gaze fell upon a small wooden box tucked away on a high shelf behind some old cookbooks. He didn't remember seeing it before. Curiosity, a rare emotion in his grief-stricken state, stirred within him. He reached for it, pulling it down. It was a simple, unadorned box, slightly worn, with a small brass latch. He recognized the delicate carving on the lid, a single stylized rose. He knew instantly it was hers. She loved roses. His heart fluttered with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. What secrets did it hold? He carefully unlatched the box and lifted the lid. From her address to him, his hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. It was dated a year ago, written shortly before his induction into the army. He swallowed hard, his throat tight, and began to read. Her voice, soft and loving, echoing in his mind with every word. My precious baby boy, if you are reading this, then I am not with you anymore, and my heart aches at the thought of leaving you. But please, my darling, do not be sad for too long. My life was full because of you, full of more joy and pride than a mother could ever dream of. I know you are worried about leaving me to serve your country, and I am worried about you too, as any mother would be. But I want you to know I am so incredibly proud of the man you have become. You are kind, generous, and your music touches so many souls. Never forget the gift God gave you, and never stop using it to bring joy to others. Always remember the lessons I tried to teach you, to be humble, to treat everyone with respect, and to always, always follow your heart. Life will bring you many challenges, my son, and moments of heartache, but you have a strong spirit, and you will overcome them. My love for you is boundless, Elvis. It reaches beyond the stars, beyond time itself. Even when I am gone, I will always be with you, watching over you, guiding you. Listen closely, and you will hear my whispers in the wind. Feel my love in the sunshine. Live your life to the fullest, my darling boy. Find happiness. Keep singing, keep shining. Make me proud as you always have. And know that my love for you is eternal, a thread that can never be broken. All my love, forever and always. Your Mama. Tears streamed down Elvis's face, blurring the words on the page. Clutched the letter to his chest, pressing it against his heart, feeling her presence, her love envelop him like a warm embrace. It was her final message, a beautiful, comforting whisper from beyond the grave. He sank to the kitchen floor, the letter held tightly in his hand, and wept. But these tears were different. They were still tears of grief, but also tears of profound gratitude, of enduring love, and a strange sense of peace. She wasn't truly gone. She was still with him, her spirit living on, guiding him. Her words, "My love for you is eternal, a thread that can never be broken," resonated deep within him. He realized that her love wasn't confined to her physical presence. It was woven into the very fabric of his being, a part of who he was. She had known this moment would come, and she had prepared him, armed him with her unconditional love, her wisdom, her faith. Slowly, carefully, he folded the letter, placing it back in the box with the locket and the photograph. He held the box in his hands, feeling its comforting weight. It was a tangible link to her, a piece of her enduring love. He stood up, feeling a faint tremor of strength return to his weary limbs. The emptiness in Graceland was still there, but it was no longer absolute. It was now infused with the echoes of her laughter and the quiet, profound wisdom of her last words. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that he would carry her love, her spirit, and her teachings with him always. She would be his guiding light, whispering in the wind, forever urging him to live, to love, and to shine. The days slowly began to lengthen, and with them, a faint, fragile sense of healing began to permeate the heavy atmosphere at Graceland. Elvis was still consumed by grief, but the raw, immediate pain had begun to soften, replaced by a deep, aching sadness that was a constant companion. He found solace in unexpected places. One of those places was the living room, specifically around the piano. For days he'd avoided it, unable to imagine making music without his mother's encouraging presence. But one quiet afternoon he found himself drawn to it. His fingers, almost on their own accord, found the familiar ivory keys. He played a soft gospel hymn, one his mother loved, her favorite. The notes filled the room, melancholic yet comforting. It was then that Vernon walked in, his eyes red, rimmed, but a soft smile on his lips. He sat in his usual armchair, listening as Elvis played. They didn't speak, but the music wove a delicate thread between them, connecting their shared grief, their shared love for Gladys. Later that day, Vernon brought out old photo albums. They sat side by side on the sofa, flipping through the faded pages, pointing at old snapshots of Gladys, young and radiant, then older, beaming with pride at her son's success. They laughed softly at some memories, their eyes welling up at others. "Remember when she tried to teach you how to bake that pecan pie?" Vernon chuckled, a genuine laugh for the first time in days. "Lord, that kitchen was a mess." Elvis smiled, a genuine, albeit tearful, smile. And she still said it was the best pie she'd ever tasted, even though it was practically burnt. These conversations, these shared memories were like balm to their wounded souls. They talked about Gladys for hours, reliving her quirks, her kindness, her unwavering spirit. They began to understand even more deeply the incredible woman she had been, and how deeply she had shaped their lives. Their shared loss, while devastating, brought them closer than ever before, cementing a bond that had always been strong but was now unbreakable. His army friends, Lamar and Red, remained a steadfast presence. They knew when to talk and when to just be there, offering quiet companionship. They would play cards with him or just sit in comfortable silence, their loyalty a comforting anchor in his stormy, emotional landscape. They didn't try to fix his grief, but simply held space for it, accepting it, and that was exactly what he needed. Music, once a source of unbearable pain, slowly began to offer a different kind of solace. He spent hours in the music room picking up his guitar, letting melodies flow from his fingers. Sometimes they were sad, mournful tunes reflecting his heartache. Other times they were familiar hymns, bringing a sense of peace. He found himself humming the old gospel songs Gladys loved, his voice finding a raw, emotional depth he hadn't known. He realized that through music he could still feel close to her. Her spirit seemed to infuse the notes, a quiet harmony of her enduring love. One evening he sat on the back porch, watching the fireflies dance in the warm evening air, a guitar in his lap. He started to strum a new melody, a mournful, soulful tune. And words began to form in his mind. Words about loss, about love, about the pain of absence and the comfort of memory. He wasn't writing a hit song. He was writing his heart, pouring his grief and his love into the music. It was therapeutic, a way to channel the overwhelming emotions that threatened to consume him. He was still fragile, still deeply in pain. The void left by Gladys's death was immense and would never truly be filled. But slowly, tentatively, the fissures in his heart were beginning to mend. He was finding small moments of peace, tiny cracks through which a glimmer of light could enter. He was learning to live with the grief, not to conquer it, but to integrate it into his life, to understand that love and loss were two sides of the same coin, and that even in the deepest sorrow there could be a quiet, resilient strength. He was finding his way back, one note, one memory, one shared tear at a time, guided by the indelible love of his mother. The initial shock and raw anguish began to settle into a deep, pervasive sorrow that Elvis knew would be a lifelong companion. But as the weeks stretched into September, a new understanding began to take root in his heart. It was a gradual, quiet realization, fueled by his father's enduring strength and the quiet wisdom of his mother's last letter. Gladys would not want him to wither away in grief. She would want him to live. He often returned to the small wooden box, rereading her letter, letting her words sink deep into his soul. "Live your life to the fullest, my darling boy. Find happiness. Keep singing, keep shining. Make me proud as you always have." Her voice, clear and loving, seemed to echo in his mind a gentle nudge towards the future. The world outside Graceland was waiting. His music career, put on hold for his military service, was a powerful force that continued to move even in his absence. Millions of fans eagerly anticipated his return. But it wasn't just about the fans or the fame anymore. He realized that continuing his music, continuing to bring joy to others, was perhaps the greatest way to honor her memory. She had believed in his talent long before anyone else had sacrificed so much to see him pursue. His dreams, to abandon it now, would be to abandon a part of her legacy. He started by doing small things. He walked around the grounds of Graceland, revisiting places where he and his mother had shared quiet moments. The swings beneath the oak tree, the garden where she tended her roses, Depora. With each memory, a wave of sadness washed over him, but also a renewed sense of purpose. He would preserve these memories, cherish them, and carry them forward. He spent more time with Vernon, their bond growing stronger with each shared meal, each quiet conversation. They started to talk about the future, about how they would manage Graceland, how they would navigate life without Gladys. Vernon, despite his own profound grief, was remarkably resilient, a testament to the strength Gladys had instilled in him, too. He encouraged Elvis, gently reminding him of his mother's dreams for him. "She always said you had a gift," son Vernon murmured one evening as they sat on the porch swing. "A gift to lift people up. Don't let her down now." Elvis nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't, Pa. I won't." He slowly began to pick up his guitar more regularly, not just for solace, but to practice, to refamiliarize himself with the feel of the strings beneath his fingers. He started singing again, his voice still raw with emotion, but gaining strength with each note. He found that the music was not just an outlet for his grief, but a conduit for his love for her. When he sang, he felt her presence most strongly. The thought of returning to Germany to resume his army service was daunting. He still had months left on his enlistment. The barracks, the drills, the distance from home, it all felt like a burden. But he remembered his mother's pride in his military service, her quiet dignity when he put on his uniform. He knew she would want him to finish what he started, to complete his duty honorably. It was another way to make her proud, to honor her values. He began to make plans, talking to Colonel Parker about what his return to the music world would look like after his discharge. It wasn't with the same boundless enthusiasm he'd once had, but with a quiet, determined resolve. His career now felt less like a pursuit of fame and more like a sacred trust, a mission to carry on the light she had ignited within him. Elvis realized that grief was not an end, but a transformation. He would carry the pain of her absence, yes, but he would also carry the immense enduring power of her love. It was a love that would shape his choices, guide his actions, and forever be a part of every note he sang, every step he took. He was still Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, but he was also a son who had faced unimaginable loss. And in that loss, he had found a deeper understanding of love, resilience, and the profound eternal bond between a mother and her child. He was ready to walk the path she would want him to, a path of purpose, of kindness, and of enduring light. Carrying her spirit in every beat of his heart, months turned into a year. Elvis had returned to Germany, completing his military service with a quiet dignity that surprised many. He had resumed his duty, often finding solace in the routine and in the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers who understood the quiet sorrow he carried. He still missed Gladys every single day, the ache in his heart. A constant, familiar presence, but it was no longer a debilitating pain. It had transformed into a profound, enduring. Kept her letter close folded carefully in his wallet, reading it often. Her words, "My love for you is eternal," a thread that can never be broken, had become his mantra, a comforting whisper in moments of loneliness or doubt. He had learned that love, true love, transcended physical presence. Gladys was gone, but her love, her spirit, remained a living, breathing force within him. He was discharged from the army in March 1960, and the world eagerly awaited his return to music. His first recording sessions and television appearances were met with a frenzy of excitement. Elvis, now older, a little wiser, and profoundly changed by his experience, poured his heart into his music. His voice held a new depth, a soulful resonance that captivated audiences even more than before. When he sang especially the ballads and gospel songs, there was a raw emotion, a tender vulnerability that spoke of a life lived of love and loss. It was, in many ways, his tribute to her. Graceland, once a silent reminder of her absence, slowly began to regain some of its warmth. Vernon was always there, a steady, loving presence. They continued to share memories of Gladys, finding comfort in their laughter as much as in their tears. Elvis often imagined his mother bustling through the rooms, her presence still palpable. A quiet joy. He made sure the garden was always filled with her favorite roses, their vibrant petals a symbol of her enduring spirit. He often spoke of her openly and lovingly in interviews and to friends. He spoke of her sacrifices, her unwavering belief in him, her unconditional love. He credited her with every success, every good deed. He knew that everything he was, everything he achieved, was rooted in her love, her upbringing, her guidance. As years passed, Elvis found new loves, built a family, and continued to create music that touched millions of lives. But Gladys remained his guiding light, his true north. He would often look up at the sky or feel a gentle breeze and imagine her there, watching over him, her whispers in the wind, her smile in the sun. He knew she was proud. Her death had been the most heartbreaking moment of his life, a shattering blow that had threatened to consume him, but through the grief he had found strength. He had learned the true meaning of resilience, the power of shared sorrow, and the eternal nature of a mother's love. He carried her in his heart, in his music, in his very soul. Elvis Presley lived a life of extraordinary highs and lows, a life lived in the blinding spotlight, but beneath the fame, the glitz, and the adoration, he was always at his core, Gladys's boy. And in every song he sang, every step he took, every act of kindness, her eternal song played on a melody of enduring love that transcended death itself, forever heartwarming, forever guiding him.